Hi, my name is Cressida, and this is the story of how I found out I was deliberately erased. Not forgotten, erased. Everyone in the family was invited to my parents' anniversary. Cousins I hadn't seen in decades were flown in. But me? They told people I refused to come because I was jealous. That lie cost me clients, my reputation, maybe even my sanity. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part? It worked. For a while. Until I found out just how far they went to silence me. Would you have stayed quiet too? The rain had started at dawn, a slow drizzle slipping across the skyline, and by mid-afternoon it had deepened into a steady rhythm, soft fingers tapping against the window pane. Seattle rain had always been part of my background music. Some people hated its constancy, but to me it was familiar, almost comforting, like the low hum of the city's breathing. I curled deeper into my favorite armchair by the window, a thick knit blanket draped across my legs, and held a steaming mug of chamomile tea between my palms. The warmth seeped into my skin, even as the cool dampness outside pressed against the glass. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the faint patter of droplets and the occasional roll of distant thunder carry me into a cocoon of stillness. I liked these afternoons best. No clients to meet in person, no deadlines that couldn't wait. No voices competing for space, just me, the muted rhythm of rain, and the view of the city breathing out in gray silhouettes. Eventually, I reached for my laptop balanced on the side table. A few design files were waiting for review, color palettes sent from a florist, fabric swatches from a vendor, a new client asking whether gold foil accents would clash with eucalyptus greens. I opened my inbox and answered a few messages on autopilot, sipping my tea slowly. Then, almost without thinking, I clicked the familiar blue icon in my browser, Facebook. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, just a mindless scroll between tasks, but within 30 seconds of opening the page, time seemed to stop. There it was, a photo stretched across my screen, polished to perfection, glowing with warm string lights. My extended family stood shoulder to shoulder around a long table. The background shimmered with soft floral arrangements. Candles flickered in crystal holders. My parents were right in the center, their smiles wide, their posture proud. My siblings clustered around them. Cousins leaned into the frame. Even distant relatives I rarely heard from were there, grinning as if the night had been flawless. Everyone, except me. My body froze before my mind caught up. My chest tightened, a knot of disbelief and recognition winding tighter with every second. I stared at the picture, scanning the corners, the edges, desperate to find some trace of myself. Maybe I had been cropped out. Maybe I was behind the lens. Maybe. But no, I hadn't been there. I hadn't been invited. The caption hit me next, sharper than any image could. A perfect night with the whole family. Perfect. Whole. Family. The words landed like salt in an open wound. My breath caught, shallow and uneven. How many times had I convinced myself I belonged? How many times had I softened myself, swallowed words, kept the peace so as not to ruin their fragile balance? How many times had I told myself I was part of the whole? And now, with one photo, one caption, the truth stared back at me. I wasn't just forgotten, I was erased. My hand trembled as I pinched the screen and zoomed in on the details. And that's when the betrayal sharpened into something colder. The decor, the pale linens, the pastel floral arrangements, the cascading fabric backdrop, I recognized every element. Months ago, when my parents asked me for ideas for a special celebration, I had stayed up late sketching out designs. I had sent mood boards, color suggestions, and links to suppliers. And now here they were, my fingerprints all over the event. They had used my work, my creativity, my effort, then deliberately shut me out of the night. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was deliberate. I slammed the laptop shut and placed it on the table beside me. The tea had gone cold in its cup. My reflection wavered faintly in the darkened screen, pale and strained. Still clinging to some shred of doubt, I reached for my phone. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I had missed a call, a text, something. I opened my messaging app, thumb scrolling faster than my breath. And then, by accident, I clicked into the wrong thread.
It was a group chat, its title glaring up at me. Anniversary plans. My stomach dropped. There it was. My name, bold, highlighted once in a planning list. But then, a strike-through line cut through it like a blade. Messages scrolled above. Make sure she doesn't find out. She'll cause drama like last time. Let's just say she refused. Better that than risk a scene. My heart thundered in my ears. I read those lines over and over until the letters blurred. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't poor communication. They had conspired. They had lied. And they had done it so casually, so confidently, that they believed I would never find out. Cold rage spread through me, steady and quiet, like ink seeping across paper. I set the phone face down on the coffee table. The rain outside had turned heavier, sheets of water sliding against the glass. A low growl of thunder rolled across the city. I whispered into the empty room, voice thin but sharp. They actually planned this. The sound of my own words startled me. They felt final, like a verdict. Memories surged unbidden, rising like ghosts. Birthdays where my cake arrived last, after the candles had already melted. Christmases where my gifts were tossed in bags without care, while others received wrapped boxes tied with bows. Dinners where I was seated on the margins, my voice drowned in the noise. For years, I had told myself those were oversights, harmless mistakes, not worth fighting over. But now, staring at that chat, I knew the truth. This wasn't oversight. This was strategy. I rose from the armchair, legs unsteady, and walked across the room to the small drafting desk where I kept my design files. My fingers shook as I pulled open the bottom drawer, a drawer I almost never touched. There, hidden beneath rolls of old tracing paper and half-used sketch pads, was a brown envelope. The handwriting on the front froze me in place. It was my father's. In bold strokes, he had written, "Do not open unless you're truly done." My pulse hammered so loudly it drowned out the rain. I reached for the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was rough, cool against my skin. How long had it been here? Weeks? Months? Had he left it for me intentionally, or had it drifted into my drawer without explanation? I hesitated, clutching it to my chest, breath shallow. The storm outside rattled the window pane. Finally, with deliberate slowness, I slipped a finger beneath the flap. The glue gave way with a soft tear. Time seemed to slow as I unfolded the pages inside. My eyes fell on the first line of familiar handwriting, and suddenly, the weight of years crashed down on me all at once. It wasn't just the exclusion. It wasn't just the lies. It was everything I had swallowed, every doubt I had silenced, every wound I had excused. As the words took shape before me, the storm I had carried inside for so long broke open. There was no room left for tears, no room for mercy, only the truth. And I knew, as I clutched those papers in the flickering glow of the storm, that the quiet storm I had held inside for years was no longer quiet. It was about to break, and once it did, nothing would be the same again. The rain hadn't stopped all evening. It hammered against the Seattle windows in erratic bursts, sometimes soft as fingertips, sometimes fierce as fists. Street lamps glowed through the water-streaked glass, casting pale ribbons of light that stretched and broke across my coffee table. My hands shook as I tore open the brown envelope, the sound sharp in the hush of the apartment. The paper inside was delicate, edges frayed and softened from years of waiting. I unfolded it carefully, afraid that too much force might crumble it into pieces. My father's handwriting swept across the page, confident strokes, yet softened by affection. It wasn't the cold cursive of contracts or signatures I'd seen him scrawl in front of clients. It was something else, gentle, intentional. I read the first words and felt my breath stop. My dearest Cressida, if you ever doubt why you matter to me, know that from the day you were born, your light has always shone in my heart. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the surge in my chest. I didn't want to cry, but the words pierced through years of silence. They carried a truth I had long craved but never dared to expect. Line by line, he confessed things he had never spoken aloud. He wrote of pride, how he admired my ability to observe when others rushed blindly, how I built things from nothing when resources were scarce. He admitted regret, that he should have stepped in when he saw my siblings mock me at dinners, that he should have stopped my mother's cold dismissals, that he should have lifted me up instead of standing silent. He acknowledged what no one else dared to say, that I had been set aside, overlooked in plain sight, excluded in ways that seemed small but cut deep. "You were never meant to be quiet," he wrote. "Don't let them convince you otherwise." Tears finally came, not the weak kind, not self-pity, hot, fierce tears. They blurred the ink until I blinked them away. This letter was more than a document. It was a lifeline thrown across the years, proof that at least one person, once, had seen me clearly. I pressed the paper to my chest, my heartbeat thundering against it. I sat like that for what felt like hours, the rain outside drowning out the hum of the city. The street beyond blurred into shadows and water. Inside, the letter's weight settled into me, not as comfort, but as resolve. When the silence grew unbearable, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered, uncertain, before I pressed on a name I hadn't spoken aloud in months. Lauren. My cousin. She had been at the anniversary celebration. She would know the truth. The line rang once, twice. Then faintly, her voice. "Hello? Lauren?" My voice was steadier than the pounding of my heart. "It's Cressida." A pause stretched across the line, taut as wire. "Cressida," she said, hesitant, almost guilty. I saw the photos. "Did you get an invitation?" I asked. Calm, measured. Though my chest burned, another pause, then softly. "No. They told us you declined. They said you were jealous." Her words sliced through me. My grip on the phone tightened. "That's not true, Lauren." Her voice cracked, tears seeping through the line. "I know. I'm so sorry. They said it would be easier if everyone believed that. I didn't question it." I closed my eyes, letting her confession sink into me. Another betrayal inside the betrayal. Another proof of how neatly the lie had been woven. I whispered, "Thank you for being honest." Then I ended the call before she could say more. The silence afterward was louder than the storm. I moved to the window, watching raindrops streak the glass like endless tears. In their blur, memories unspooled one by one. Thanksgiving dinners, where my chair was shoved to the far corner of the table. Birthdays where I clapped for others, but no one clapped for me. Holidays where my siblings received praise for the very things I had done in quiet, unseen effort. All those times I had excused it as accidents, oversights. But tonight, with Lauren's words echoing, I knew better. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen to erase me. The hollow space inside me filled with something heavier, sharper. No more silence. I turned from the window and crossed to my desk, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. My laptop glowed faintly as it powered on, screen casting a pale light across the room. I opened my old cloud archive, years of saved projects, proposals, and designs. My hands moved fast, almost fevered, typing search terms, opening folders long forgotten. And there they were, file after file, event proposals I had drafted for family gatherings, anniversaries, birthdays, baby showers. My name marked in metadata, timestamps etched in digital stone. One folder caught my breath. 2019 anniversary proposal. I clicked it open. Pages bloomed across the screen. My sketches, my chosen palettes, the exact floral arrangements that had decorated the perfect family night from which I had been excluded. Proof, not just in my memory, but in their foundations. They had built that night with my hands, with my vision. Then they cut me out and rewrote the story. I downloaded the folder, backed it up 3 times, on a drive, on the cloud, on an encrypted stick. Each save felt like striking a hammer against a false wall. When the files were secure, I sat back, the glow of the laptop fading as I shut the lid. The room was dim again, rain softening into a rhythmic lull outside. My body ached with exhaustion, but my veins thrummed with electricity. I whispered into the quiet, "No more silence."
The words hung in the air like a vow. This wasn't about begging for acknowledgement anymore. It wasn't about squeezing into a space they had always denied me. It was about building something undeniable with my own hands and tearing down the lies they had used to erase me. I pulled the brown envelope closer, the letter still warm from my grip. My father's words echoed in my head. "You were never meant to be quiet." I believed him now. And as I scrolled once more through the files on my drive, I found the one that nearly took my breath away, the original concept plan. My concept for this very party. The party they swore I had refused. The party they built on my designs while feeding the world their lie. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, the truth glowing in front of me. The storm outside rumbled again, low and insistent. They thought they could silence me. But I had proof, and this time, proof would speak louder than any of their lies. The glow of the laptop bathed my living room in a muted blue, throwing faint shadows across the walls. I stared at the folder names on the screen, the text sharp and cold against the dark background. Anniversary Proposal 2025. Venue Layout. Guest Flow Diagrams. My chest tightened as if each title were an accusation. I hesitated before clicking, steadying my breath. I hadn't realized just how many hours I had poured into those projects. How many nights I had stayed awake sketching floor plans, arranging seating charts, or choosing color palettes that whispered elegance without overwhelming the senses. Every detail had carried part of me, my taste, my thought, my fingerprints. Inside the Anniversary Proposal 2025 folder, the timestamp glowed back at me. 6 months ago. The date was irrefutable. I opened the first file, and there it was, the concept board I had created, familiar down to the faint watermark of my initials in the corner. The floral palette I had chosen for its softness, the tent layout I had sketched by hand, the lantern placement meant to cast light without glare. A bittersweet pride rose in me, pride because the work was beautiful, betrayal because they had taken it, polished it, and presented it as theirs. My chest throbbed with a mixture that felt both like love for my craft and disgust at how easily it had been weaponized against me. Clicking deeper into the folders, I found subcategories: final drafts, vendor quotes, setups. Each bore my name and metadata, my email headers attached, my handwriting scanned into PDFs. Every trace was there. Every digital breadcrumb proved the ideas had been born from me. I copied the entire set to an external drive, my fingers deliberate, my jaw clenched. Then I slid the drive into the locked box I kept in my desk drawer. When I switched back to my inbox, the shift hit me like a slap. 3 subject lines stood out, their words heavy as lead. Project cancellation. Decision not to proceed. Apologies for the change. My stomach flipped. I clicked the first one. The language was formal, almost apologetic, but merciless in its finality. Due to recent rumors regarding business conduct, we must withdraw from our agreement. Wishing you the best in your future endeavors. Rumors. Business conduct. My pulse spiked. I opened the second email. The phrasing was eerily similar. The third was worse, short, clipped, dismissive. All 3 contained a forwarded note at the bottom. I scrolled. My breath caught when I read it. She has been flagged for erratic behavior, for liability. We must distance ourselves. A burner address. No name. No trace. Just a carefully constructed smear, passed along like gospel. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The room felt heavier, the air thicker than the ever-present Seattle damp. My career, my clients, my livelihood, they weren't confronting me directly. They were dismantling me in whispers, one careful rumor at a time. Anger sharpened through the fog. I opened a new tab, searching the burner address. Nothing. No digital footprint. Clean. Too clean. Whoever orchestrated this knew how to cover their tracks. I shut the laptop abruptly and pressed my palms against my eyes. No tears. Just a dull ache that settled into my bones. And then, like a knife twisting in memory, I thought of the decanter. Months ago, I had ordered a rare engraved wine decanter for my parents. A gift meant to honor them, chosen with care, tracked meticulously to their doorstep. I had imagined it on their dining table, gleaming with the weight of sentiment. Now I pulled out my phone and searched the videos from the party. There it was, a clip posted to social media. In the frame, Callista's sister-in-law lifted the decanter high, her face glowing with pride. "Thank you, Callista, for this unbelievable gift," she said, voice carrying over the clinking of glasses. The caption read, "A gracious family gift." I froze. My lungs locked. My heart pinned me to my seat. That was my gift, my money, my choice, my gesture of love. And now it was repackaged, relabeled, presented as hers. The bile rose in my throat. I swung my legs off the sofa and stood abruptly, energy coiling tight inside me. My hands needed something to do, so I reached for the leather-bound journal on my desk. Flipping it open, I grabbed a pen and began writing. Names, dates, email headers, delivery confirmations, phone calls. Each one went onto the page in black ink, circled or underlined, the pattern of betrayal spreading like a map of rot. I paused when I wrote Sable. I didn't just circle her name. I drew a red box around it, pressing the pen so hard the ink nearly tore the paper. I closed the journal and carried it with me to the terrace. Outside, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle. Droplets tapped against the wooden slats, each impact rhythmic, relentless. Beyond, the city shimmered, windows glowing, cars threading light across wet streets, skyscrapers standing indifferent against the night. I gripped the railing, the damp seeping into my palms. "You lied," I whispered, my voice low but steady. "You took from me." But I won't step back. The drizzle fell harder, as though the sky itself leaned closer to hear. I tore a sheet from my journal and scribbled a single line in bold strokes. "If you want to play lies, I'll respond with truth." I pinned the note beneath my coffee mug on the desk, a vow to myself as much as to them. Then I shut the journal, set my phone face down, and returned inside. My breathing slowed. My logic sharpened. The fog of despair gave way to clarity. They had stolen my designs. They had spread rumors. They had even stolen my gifts, wrapping them in someone else's name. Fine. I would not beg for justice. I would build it, piece by piece, file by file, timestamp by timestamp. The storm outside rumbled faintly, echoing like a warning. But inside me, another storm gathered, quieter, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Not the storm of someone pleading for a place at their table. The storm of someone who had been erased and was ready to correct the record with fireproof truth. The red ink from the night before still burned in my mind, almost as though it had left a physical scar across the page. I could see it even when I closed my eyes. Sable's name boxed, underlined, carved into permanence. It felt less like handwriting and more like a warning written in blood. When morning came, the image followed me into the light. I stirred awake, stiff and unsteady, my neck sore from falling asleep upright in my desk chair. My journal lay open where I had left it, the pen resting across the margin like a soldier who'd fallen mid-battle. I lifted the journal and carried it with me into the living room. Outside, Seattle's rain hadn't stopped. It never truly did, but now it whispered against the windows in soft, persistent taps, as though the sky itself wanted to remind me that the storm wasn't only within me. I set the journal down on the coffee table and dressed with care. A neutral blouse, pressed slacks, a blazer, armor disguised as clothing. As I zipped my bag, my fingers brushed against the envelope that contained Dad's letter, the one I'd read over and over until the words blurred. I tucked it inside. I wasn't sure why I carried it. Maybe for proof, maybe for courage. The drive to the church was quiet. The wipers swiped back and forth, steady as a metronome, and the familiar streets blurred past. The church steeple came into view, small, modest, the shingles gleaming wet in the drizzle. I hadn't stepped foot inside for months, maybe longer, but today I felt pulled there by something deeper than routine. Churches weren't just about faith, they were about community. And in communities, whispers traveled fast. I parked under the low branches of an oak tree, its limbs heavy with rain. For a moment, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. Then I inhaled, steadying myself, and stepped out. The scent of damp concrete, old cedar beams, and rain-soaked soil filled the air as I walked up the steps and slipped under the portico. Inside, the sanctuary was exactly as I remembered. Hymnals lined neatly in the pews, stained glass windows catching what little light the gray day offered, candles flickering faintly at the altar. I slid into a back pew a few minutes before the service began, keeping my head down, my hands folded in my lap. People filtered in, shaking umbrellas, murmuring hellos. Some nodded at me, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Others glanced quickly, then turned away. Their warmth was no longer free, no longer unguarded. It was measured, calculated. A shift had happened, subtle but undeniable. The opening hymn rose, voices blending in familiar melodies. My lips moved, but the words felt hollow, fragile. These were hymns I had known since childhood, but now they rang differently. What good were verses about love and grace when the trust beneath them had already cracked? Midway through the service, I caught fragments of a conversation. Two women sat near the front, leaning close, their whispers sharp enough to pierce through the hymn. "That's her," one murmured. "The one who caused all that family drama." "She never showed, right? Must have refused again." The words sliced me open. My breath hitched. I had never said a single word publicly. I had swallowed my pain in silence. And yet, here it was, spilling out of someone else's mouth, dressed up as fact. I forced myself to look forward, but my eyes flicked once toward them. One of the women caught my gaze and immediately looked away. My chest tightened. I sat perfectly still, back straight, hands clasped, because I knew the truth. If they repeat it here, people will believe it. In a church, rumor becomes gospel. The sermon faded into noise I could barely register. My pulse thrummed in my ears. When the benediction was given, people rose in unison, coats rustling, footsteps echoing down the aisle. I stayed seated until the aisles cleared. Then Mary appeared. Mary had been my mother's friend, more than a friend. She had been like a quiet aunt to me once, someone who braided my hair during Sunday school picnics and whispered encouragement when I stumbled through reciting verses. Now, she approached with careful steps, her face soft but weary. "Cressida," she said gently, leaning close. "I'm sorry people are talking, but—" She lowered her voice. "Your mother told us you refused. She said you thought you were too proud to attend." My throat tightened, my voice dropping to a whisper. "That's not true." Mary's eyes held sorrow, but also resignation. "I believe you. But you know how convenient a false story can be." She glanced toward the doors, where the congregation spilled into chatter and coffee. "If you ever want to tell your side—" Her words trailed off, unfinished, swallowed by hesitation. I nodded. "Thank you," I said softly. By the time I returned to my car, rain was streaming down the windshield in heavy streaks, blurring the world outside into watercolor smudges. I sat there, hands still on the steering wheel, her words replaying in my mind. "Your mother told us you refused." That was the lie. Easier to accept than the messy, complicated truth. People didn't want nuance. They wanted neat stories, ones that fit the image they already held. And I had become the villain in theirs. By evening, I sat in my home office, laptop glowing in the dim light. The rain had settled into a steady drumbeat against the glass. My journal lay open beside me, Dad's letter tucked under its cover. I opened the family group chat and typed slowly, deliberately. "I'm aware of rumors spreading about me. I've remained silent out of love. But if the distortions continue, I will speak publicly. I will defend the truth, not to shame, but to protect my reputation." I hovered over the send button, chest tight. Then, with a single breath, I clicked. The screen went still. Message delivered. Seen by a few. No responses. Just silence. The silence said everything. I closed the laptop, heavy-hearted but unbroken. That's when my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. My business associate. Someone who had stood by me through projects and deadlines, through tight budgets and last-minute pitches. I answered, bracing. His voice was quiet, hesitant. "Cressida, we've been contacted by someone.
They're claiming you're under emotional stress. Again. My pulse stumbled. My free hand tightened around the armrest. Again. That word meant this wasn't the first time. Someone wasn't just spreading rumors in church pews. They were reaching into my work, my livelihood, carrying whispers into boardrooms and inboxes. The war line had shifted. I ended the call politely, though my voice shook. I set the phone down on the desk, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the rain pounding harder against the glass. The room seemed smaller, the night outside unfairly loud. I rose, walked to the window, and pressed my palm against the cool pane. Water slid down in rivulets, tracing paths I couldn't control. "Keep going," I whispered, watching the city blur through the glass. "Let them spill everything before I do." Because when I spoke, I would not be whispering. I locked the apartment door behind me and leaned against it, the solid click echoing louder than it should have in the quiet hallway. The envelope slid into my bag with a heavy finality. Daniel's words still circled like vultures in my mind. "Someone has been contacting us. They're saying you're under emotional stress." It wasn't concern, it was strategy. They were planting doubt in the soil of my reputation, watering it with lies, waiting for it to bloom into something poisonous. But if they thought I would wilt, they underestimated me. I moved into the kitchen, where a single lamp glowed softly against the rain-darkened windows. Seattle's drizzle tapped steady against the glass, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I set my bag on the chair, pulled my laptop closer, and began combing through my inbox. One subject line caught me, this time last year. It had been buried under new messages, unopened, forgotten. I clicked. The email contained a single attachment, a photo. My breath caught when it filled the screen. It was the anniversary celebration from the year before, long banquet tables draped in fabric, glowing under warm ambient lights. Guests leaned close in conversation, glasses raised mid-toast. The floral arrangement stood tall, perfectly balanced in hues of cream and blush. And there, just in the corner, almost hidden, was me, a younger version of myself, sleeves rolled up, crouched behind one of those centerpieces, adjusting petals with careful precision. My initials, CM, appeared faintly in the corner of a design draft overlay, watermarked on the mock-ups I'd sent months earlier. My work, my design, my vision, that was my night, my fingerprints on every detail. And yet, when the speeches were given, when the cake was cut, when the applause filled the air, it was someone else standing in the light, someone else receiving thanks, someone else owning my work. I closed the photo, jaw tightening. A knot formed in my chest, not grief this time, but a hard stone of fury. I pulled up my financial archives, scrolling through spreadsheets I hadn't opened in months. In a folder marked Support, Family 2019, I found it. An outgoing wire transfer of $8,000. The recipient, Ronald's renovation firm. My memory sharpened, his message claiming a burst pipe, begging for help until after winter. I opened the attached invoices. My stomach dropped. Venue prep. Audio-visual rental. Event staffing. His so-called emergency repairs were nothing more than party expenses. My money had been siphoned to fund a night I hadn't even been invited to. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft dressed as generosity. I printed the records, slipped them into a folder, and drove straight into the damp night. The city glistened, streets slick with fresh rain, neon lights reflecting off puddles. I didn't call ahead. I didn't plan a meeting. I wanted the element of shock. At his office, the receptionist's eyes flickered with surprise when I walked in. My voice was steady, sharp. "I need to see Ronald." She hesitated, then led me down the hall to his private office. He looked up when I entered, surprise flashing across his face before it slid into practiced composure. "Cressida," he said evenly, leaning back in his chair. I didn't waste words. I placed the folder on his desk. One by one, I laid out the wire transfer, the invoices, the text messages where he had promised repayment. No accusation, just evidence. He exhaled slowly, eyes darting to the papers. "You weren't at the event." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "No, Ron, I wasn't invited. And yet you had no problem stealing from me to pay for it." The color drained from his face.
His lips parted, searching for excuses. "It was for family," he stammered. "You never show up anyway. You know how anxious you get." He tried for a smirk, but it broke halfway, collapsing into something ugly. I shook my head. My voice was low, controlled. "That's the lie you've been feeding them. You think they'll believe I chose exclusion? That I declined to show up for something I built? I think they'll believe this." I tapped the papers. I slid one final sheet across the desk. A typed notice, bold and undeniable. "You have 7 days to repay the full amount, or legal action will follow." He blinked, caught between outrage and fear. Before he could find his voice, I stood, turned, and walked out. My heels clicked against the tile floor, each step an exclamation mark. Outside, the air was damp, electric. The rain had softened into mist, clinging to my hair, my coat. I inhaled sharply as I slid behind the wheel of my car. For the first time in months, the balance had shifted. At home, I didn't rest.
I pulled out my phone, opened the family group chat, and typed slowly, each word deliberate. "If you want to talk war, fine, but know I'm ready to protect the truth." I hit send. Minutes passed in silence. Then my phone buzzed. A voice note appeared in the thread. My hand trembled as I pressed play. "If she wants war," a voice said, calm, almost smug, "I say we give her one." The words filled my apartment like smoke, acrid and suffocating. A challenge, a declaration, blood in the air. I set the phone down and stood still in the quiet room, the lamp casting a soft glow across the papers still spread across my table. My heartbeat slowed, my mind steadied. There was no fear, no hesitation, only clarity. The storm outside began again, rain gathering, thunder rolling faintly in the distance. I walked to the window, pressed my palm against the cold glass, and whispered to the night, "They chose battle. I choose to win." That voice note stung like salt in a fresh wound. I stared at the screen a moment longer, then locked my phone and closed the chat. The quiet in my apartment felt brittle, as though anything might crack it. But I couldn't rest. I had to move. The next morning, I arrived early at my studio in Ballard. Dim overhead lights illuminated clean drafting tables and blank canvases. I booted my computer and opened my email. One message stood out. "Congratulations, your work featured." I clicked it with a mix of hope and dread. The article showed a design I recognized instantly. The same lighting arrangement, the same floral structure, the same seamless flow I had sketched months ago. Only the byline read, "Callista Designs." I scrolled the feature. Slight tweaks, yes, but the essence, the signature strokes, were unmistakably mine. My breath caught. The room felt smaller. I opened the metadata on the images. The file paths showed it had been uploaded via an account belonging to Avon. Betrayal flared. My thoughts raced back to last month when Avon stayed at my place during a breakup. I made her tea and lent a sympathetic ear. I never expected she would use my trust to betray me. I closed the article and pulled up document logs. I cross-referenced timestamps, file routes, even IP addresses, everything traced back, via Avon's email address forwarding to Callista's contest submission portal. The pattern became undeniable. This was orchestrated. My cheeks burned with anger, but I sat still, breathing carefully. Precision would win this fight, not spectacle. Midday, I called Avon. Her voice was shaky when she answered. "Avon, we need to meet. At the cafe on 15th and Pike, in an hour." She said nothing. Then, "Okay." At the cafe, rain misted the windows. I chose a table in the corner. Moments later, she appeared, umbrella dripping, eyes red. I slid across a printed packet. Emails, forwarding chains, metadata, everything there in black and white. I watched her face change. Surprise first, then guilt, then confusion. "You submitted my design as your own," I said quietly. "No accusation, just fact." She shook. "Cressida, I thought you didn't want to compete anymore. I believed you were done with the industry." Her voice cracked. I leaned forward, containing the tidal wave of betrayal. "You believed Callista's lie. You believed I walked away. You used that to betray me." I care, just not about people who weaponize my trust. Tears welled in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. I stood and walked away. Back in my studio, I drafted a formal complaint. I addressed the Design Association with precise language: intellectual property claim, defamation risk, unauthorized representation. I attached screenshots, file metadata, email logs. I felt a surge of control. Within hours, I received a reply. Your claim is compelling and clear. If substantiated, the submission may be removed and the responsible party sanctioned. Relief mixed with vindication. The tide was shifting. Later that evening, a notification popped up. An anonymous account had tagged me in a smear post. Some designers can't handle rejection, going legal to stay relevant. The comment was mean, mocking, but it lacked weight against my evidence. I leaned against my window ledge, watching raindrops streak the glass. Seattle's skyline blurred in the haze. I let anger settle into resolve. This fight wasn't personal anymore. It was rightful reclamation. Soon, the smoke would clear. I closed the browser tab and exhaled. The headline stung. Some designers can't handle rejection, and now they're going legal to stay relevant. It read like mockery, but I felt its weight, not because of the words, but because I knew who whispered them. That evening, I stepped into the community center auditorium where the fundraiser was being held. It was the same place I'd helped sponsor months ago, a gala meant to raise funds for art education, a cause close to my late father's heart. I entered under soft lights, dressed in a dark dress and blazer, my expression composed. The air tasted of orchids and polished floors. I moved through the crowd, nodding to acquaintances. The chatter paused as I passed. Eyes slid away. In the center, my mother, Vera, stood before a podium, offering thanks to sponsors. Guests applauded. She raised her hand and said, loud enough for many to hear, "I'm just glad she showed up this time. After everything that went down, I wondered whether she would." Polite claps followed. Some faces turned to me. My chest constricted. I stayed still, considered my options, then walked forward slowly. I looked at her and said firmly, "You forgot to mention I was never invited." The hush deepened. People shifted in their seats. Vera's face flickered, but she recovered and nodded serenely. A murmur rippled across the room. I stood there in silence, letting the weight of truth speak louder than any raised voice. Later, phones lit up, texts flew. I drifted toward the refreshment table. A guest approached. "I didn't realize. I always thought you missed something." I nodded and said lightly, "Stories change when people need them to." I left before more confrontation. Back at home, the wrath of the night followed me to my inbox. Hundreds of unsubscribes. Angry replies. One message read, "You're using tragedy for clout." Another, "I trusted you. Now I don't." Bile rose in my throat. I then discovered something more sinister, a Reddit thread titled, "Local Designer Attacks Family." Screenshots included private emails I had sent during a rough patch, taken out of context, twisted. People I had never told these personal things to were reading them. One comment, "Drama queen, always dramatizing family for sympathy." I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. I realized I was fighting beyond my own circle now. This was public, but I would not be passive. I opened a new document and began constructing a timeline. File accesses, modifications, screenshots, video recordings from the fundraiser, hidden logs. I cataloged everything. Then I phoned my lawyer. My voice was clear. "I want a cease and desist drafted. We prepare for discovery." "I intend to defend every piece of truth," she replied. "Understood. Let me begin the paperwork." Relief washed through me, cool and steady. Later, a local blogger texted, "You've gone quiet lately. Do you want to tell your side?" I typed back, "Not yet. Let them play their hand first." I sat at my laptop in the dark living room and opened a private folder named Confession Audio. My cursor hovered over a file. Family Town Hall Call. Unredacted. I pressed play. I sat in my apartment, the last glimmer of daylight slipping behind the skyline, and pressed play on that file. The once silent room filled with voices. My heartbeat ratcheted up. Sable here. Remember, if she shows up, we disappear behind her light. One voice, warm and amused, said. Another answered, yes, if she gets applause, we fade. Callista laughed, low and confident. Just say she declined. She'll believe it. She always does. Mom's voice. Our story is polished. She was too proud, too dramatic to attend. That's what people will buy in. They chuckled. I sat frozen. What I heard wasn't just betrayal. It was the core of the conspiracy. Their plan laid bare. They debated phrasing. They calibrated how to gaslight me into silence. They schemed to make me disappear behind their narrative. They weaponized my absence and my reputation. The audio crackled with cruelty and certainty. They'd thought it safe. They'd mistaken silence for submission. I closed the laptop, my throat dry, anger pooling inside. I could have screamed. I could have cried. Instead, I squared my shoulders. They wanted war. They'd started it. The next morning, I contacted my legal team. I walked into their office and laid out everything: the audio file, the metadata chain, the timeline. We prepared a lawsuit: intellectual property theft, defamation, emotional distress. Their eyes widened at the scope. They asked, "Do you realize the risk of going public?" I nodded. I know. But they've already gone public with lies. It's time truth wins. Then we issued a press release. I drafted my own public statement. The truth was never meant to come out. But here we are. Within hours, it spread across social media. The reaction was immediate. Messages poured in. We believe you, Cressida. It took you proving it, but someone had to do it. Families break you quietly. Thank you for breaking yours loudly. The tide shifted. Callista's PR firm froze her account. She was suspended pending inquiry. Sable's name vanished from event rosters. My mother issued a statement of sorrow, vague, train-wrecked by her own voice, but it arrived too late. Weeks later, I accepted an invite to speak at an industry forum. Unexpected, unplanned. They introduced me. I walked to the stage, spotlights warmed my face. I said, sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving your family, it's realizing they left you a long time ago and reclaiming your own space. The audience stood. Applause thundered. Backstage, a hand pressed an envelope into mine. I opened it. Inside, a birth certificate, my name, and a second name I had never seen. The header read, Twin, deceased at birth. My heart seized. The document confirmed what my mother never told me. They had hidden more than exclusion. They hid truth. They lied about more than the party. The envelope trembled in my hand as I stepped into my living room. The rain outside had quieted to a whisper, but inside my heart roared with questions. I unfolded the birth certificate. My name was listed. And then, directly beneath it, another name I did not recognize. A twin sister who had passed at birth. I sank into my chair and stared at the page. The years I had felt invisible took on new meaning. All along, they had hidden another life. My invisibility began the moment I survived someone else's death. Valora never told me the full story. The document offered fragments. My father had hoped to name both daughters after queens, Cressida and Selene. But Valora insisted only one would be celebrated. The other would be a ghost in the records. I read that line again and again, tasting bitter defeat. In that moment, everything shifted. My wounds, my resilience, my name, they were more than a narrative about exclusion. I had survived a kind of erasure from birth. The next morning, I sat before my laptop. The lawsuit had progressed quietly, documents filed, statements submitted. Now I saw the aftermath. News articles picking up my story, podcasts about toxic family structures, legal analyses of defamation and intellectual property. My narrative had become a case study, a cautionary tale, and a beacon. I read one podcast summary titled, How Families Weaponize Silence. They cited my case. I felt a wave of disquiet and pride that my struggle might empower someone else. But the ache lingered. Stories don't heal in an instant.
Later that week, I drove to Bainbridge Island, looking for a fresh start. I found a small cottage by the water, its siding a soft gray, windows facing the sea. Moss and ivy hugged the foundation. I signed the papers on the porch. I walked inside, letting ocean air fill my lungs. I knew I was free to rebuild here. I cleared a corner for a design studio. A desk, natural light, reclaimed wood shelves. And then I began again, using my own voice, not someone else's whispers. I volunteered with a women's shelter in town, teaching design basics, color theory, floral arrangement, layout. I poured my energy into connection, not competition. One rainy afternoon, I visited my father's grave. The cemetery overlooked Puget Sound, mist curled around headstones. I walked toward the stone carved with his name. I placed the birth certificate next to it, along with a single white lily. I whispered, "I forgive you, but not them." I felt tears fall, quiet and deliberate. I named my next project Celine, for the sister I never knew. In every stroke, I wove acknowledgement of her presence, even in absence. My hands shaped light and shadow until her name sang in every curve. Months passed. My case moved forward. Media attention softened with new scrutiny of Callista and Sable's actions. Some reached out, family, distant acquaintances, apologies belated or tentative. I did not reject them, but I did not invite them back either. On a late evening, I sat by my window, listening to the water lap below. The city lights shimmered across the channel. I thought of conflict, betrayal, survival. I thought of silence that kills and voices that heal. In my mind, I framed the words I would one day share on video, not to provoke, but to convey truth. Family doesn't always break you with fists. Sometimes they do it with silence, with smiles, with half-truths. But healing doesn't wait for an apology. And strength doesn't beg for a seat at the table. I touched the birth certificate and released a quiet breath. I spoke plainly. My name is Cressida, and I was never lost. I was just uninvited. Before we wrap up, let me ask you this. How many times have you stayed silent just to keep the peace, only to realize it was never about peace at all? Sometimes the hardest truth isn't that they hurt you, it's that they meant to. But healing begins the moment you choose to speak up. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that dive deep into betrayal, resilience, and redemption. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one left out? And how did you rise from it?